Your line has been muted.
Program is operating under a new vision, which is now about 3 years old. And one of the key goals of the vision is to integrate with other programs. And the vision notes that because TMDLs are not self-implementing, effective integration of the key programs, listing TMDLs, water quality standards, monitoring and assessment, 319, 404, and NPDS, that encompass assessment and point and non-point source control actions, it is important to realize that the pollution reduction goals identified in TMDL's approaches kind of hinge on our relationship with these other programs. So that's our vision goal about integration, and a linchpin of our vision is to seek to achieve state-identified priorities. And in the last couple of years, we've received those state-identified priorities for the next 8 years or so, and two key pollutants that states want to address are nutrients and pathogens, and there's an obvious essential link with the non-point source program in addressing those challenges. So we've had integration sessions in our national meetings for many years with the 319 program, presentations from both headquarters, EPA regions, and from states, and those have been very great discussions, and this webinar is a continuation of that engagement with the non-point source program. So just to emphasize that for the 319 program, learning from our non-point source program partners will help advance the success of TMDLs and other plans in achieving water quality. Continuing to encourage I continue to encourage close coordination between these programs, and it's important that TMDLs and other plans be informed by the strategies and partners that the non-point source program can contribute, and that's a main goal of this webinar, looking for environmental water quality outcomes. So I'm going to turn over to Linda Hall in a sister branch within our office.
Thanks, Jim, and hi everyone. So this is Linda, non-point source control branch, and Jim, you said that very well. So I'm going to keep my remarks really short, but just pivot a little bit off of what Jim just said in terms of today's webinar being another exciting opportunity, I think, to continue to work our programs together. And we have enjoyed a number of those opportunities in the last couple of years as the 303D program has started moving out on its new vision, and there's just been a lot of great opportunities for discussions around priority setting, discussions around joint implementation documents, and then today's discussion having to do with engagement with stakeholders, and for us in the non-point source program, a very important set of partners in the agricultural community. So I know that this audience well understands that, you know, in the non-point source world, we deal with a really diverse set of pollution challenges and a really diverse set of partners. So, you know, abandoned mine drainage, failing and leaking septic systems, stream restorations just in general, unregulated urban runoff are all things that are supported by the non-point source program. So it certainly isn't all about ag. However, ag is, of course, an important focus area for us, given its role in 303D impairments and its role in the landscape in this country. So we have invested very heavily, especially in the last 5 years, in growing our partnerships, of course, with USDA, but also with an array of other agricultural partners. And in that work, we've been well, instrumental to that work has been Erica Larson and Katie Flayhive, our ag experts, I will go so far as to say, in the non-point source program. Erica's squirming, but yeah, she is. So anyway, I'm really pleased that Erica can give you an overview today of the many ways in which the non-point source program here, kind of at the headquarters level in our regions, and of course in state non-point source programs, have worked collaboratively in many ways with our agricultural partners. And so I think this will be a great webinar for having that joint conversation with the 303D folks about how we can work together in that area. So that's what I have to say. Thanks.
Hey, Erica, before you get started, can I just say that that beeping noise is new attendees joining, so I'm working on a way to kind of mute that or quiet it, but I'm positive at least we have a lot of people watching. So.
Good news. Thanks, Jasper. Keep coming. So, hi, everybody. I'm Erica Larson, and I'm with the Non-Point Source program at EPA headquarters here in D.C., where I work primarily on agricultural programs and partnerships, and I'm really happy to be a part of this discussion. So I want to thank the TMDL 303D program for inviting us to participate on this webcast and share information about the Non-Point Source program and our engagement with the agricultural community. So the purpose of this discussion, or this part of the webinar, is to really give an overview of our National Non-Point Source program and our agricultural programs for the TMDL and 303D community, and also to discuss successful ways to coordinate with the agricultural sector and specifically with USDA and NRCS. So I'm going to kick off the discussion kind of giving a broad overview, but following my presentation we'll have 4 really great regional and state examples and case studies who are actually doing the work on the ground to engage the ag community and ultimately improve water quality. So I just want to thank those 4 speakers for being involved in this discussion and shaping the webcast and for sharing their successes and their stories and challenges as well. Here's an outline of what will be discussed in this introductory section. So first I'll talk about some of the main agricultural partners for the Non-Point Source program at the national and the state level. Then I'll lead into an overview of some of our Non-Point Source agricultural programs and initiatives, and then kind of lastly talk about the Non-Point Source program engagement with agriculture and ways in which the 303D and TMDL community can engage. So this is the first of 3 sections. Again, this is where we'll kind of list out some of the ag partners for the Non-Point Source program. Okay, so bear with me as I go through this slide here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through this list of partners and ways in which the Non-Point Source program have partnered with the agricultural community. But I do want to point out on the onset this is not a fully comprehensive list of agricultural partners. As you all know, and many of you have many other partners in the agricultural community that are maybe not highlighted on this slide, and we certainly don't want to exclude those. I don't have time to talk about every ag partner, but this is merely a subset of partners that we're engaged with through the Non-Point Source program on a regular basis, or whose work we want to highlight that may be of interest to those of you participating on the call. So, of course, NRCS is a key partner in our ag efforts, and in essence, their Farm Bill programs help landowners participate in really essential key conservation practices that improve water quality. And one of their largest programs is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, which includes over 100 conservation practices that are really important in improving water quality. So we'll talk about the work of NRCS in detail throughout the webcast, and in our EPA regional and state examples. We'll also highlight that work later in the discussion. The conservation districts are the largest recipient of 319 ag funding and are critical to implementing 319 agricultural grants. So the National Association of Conservation Districts, or NACD, is the organization that represents roughly 3,000 conservation districts across the country, and we're happy and pleased to be partnering with NACD. We've participated in national meetings and held workshops on 319 and watershed planning, among other partnership efforts. Industry service providers, so that includes certified crop advisors, or CCAs, and agricultural retailers. Recent research and analyses have shown that ag retailers are ranked among the most important source of information by farmers, and farmers rely on them for their decision-making on their fields. They provide recommendations on a variety of land management decisions, and these include pest management, irrigation use, fertilizer application, et cetera, and they really ought to be considered as outreach projects are developed. A really kind of key new program for the CCAs that some of you may be familiar with is the 4R Advanced Nutrient Management Program. 4Rs, for those of you who aren't familiar, stands for the right rate, source, timing, and placement of nutrients. And it's not just for fertilizer, it's also manure application as well. But this is a new program. It's a specialty for the CCAs to really advance their skills and draw awareness to nutrient management and planning in farm fields. So it's currently offered in 15 states and Ontario, but it's rapidly expanding to all states across the country. A similar effort is the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Certification launched by the Fertilizer Institute, TFI, and other partners. And again, it encourages retailers and other certified professionals to adopt these best practices through the 4Rs. Aside from this effort, the Fertilizer Institute also funds research related to nutrient management, and we have been engaged and been able to participate in these research meetings to learn about the state of the science related to nutrient management. Nonprofits and NGOs obviously have a large role in planning, outreach, and assessment. So just one key partner is CTIC, or the Conservation Technology Innovation Center, which is a nonprofit comprised of a variety of ag partners, including industry, conservation organization, and producers as well. And the Non-Point Source Control Branch has had a long-standing partnership with CTIC and has had a few grants as well to work with ag stakeholders to improve water quality. And CTIC does lead initiatives and builds kind of these local coalitions at the landscape level. Watershed groups and coalition groups also work hand-in-hand with ag watershed projects. They interact with local stakeholders and those who really have a thorough understanding of the people, the local concerns, the local water quality issues, farming practices, et cetera. But they also have a role in tracking conservation practice implementation against a watershed plan. Thus, they're able to track progress and determine if goals have been met. In addition to these watershed groups, these farmers and locally led farmer networks are really excellent sources of one-on-one training as well for farmers and should be considered as well in outreach and technical assistance programs. So lastly, of course, state agricultural departments, they have a variety of programs that can be leveraged for water quality improvements. Just to name an example, in Iowa, the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, or IDALS, has a unique water quality program specific to their state where they provide cost share to farmers to implement water quality focused practices. So those were partners for kind of on-the-ground efforts. This is listing out some partners for agricultural research, coordination, and education. We rely on the science and information from many outside organizations to really help inform our non-point source program and to stay abreast of the science on conservation practices, effectiveness, and also adoption of these practices. So we'll talk about these partners in more detail, but university research and extension does play a really large role in research related to conservation practices and outreach on agricultural management. But they can also have a role in water quality monitoring components of projects. Again, USDA is a critical partner through their conservation programs, which I mentioned earlier, and because of their shared goals, their technical expertise, relationship with producers, et cetera. But I also do want to point out some work by ARS, the Agricultural Research Service, and NRCS, NIFA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. In particular, the Conservation Effects Assessment Project. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's the SEEP analyses, but they provide really sound scientific information on ag conservation adoption and water quality benefits. So some of you may be interested in these national assessments and also watershed assessments that are available across the country. But also to note is these agencies under USDA can provide tools to farmers that help target critical areas and watersheds and prioritize the placement of practices, which can be really useful for our programs and watershed planning efforts and moving forward with conservation practices. Lastly, this bullet, these are just a few scientific organizations, work groups, and coalitions that provide information on agricultural sciences, but there's a whole host of organizations out there focused on particular fields of interest in the agricultural community, and some of you may be involved in some of these efforts, but often these groups hold annual meetings to share information and learn from stakeholders. So these forums may be of interest to you if you're not already involved and can provide further opportunities to partner in projects. So I've talked a lot about the variety of agricultural partners that help to implement and inform our 319 program, but they also leverage 319 with USDA programs. So as Linda said on the onset of the presentation in this webinar, the 319 program works to address the diverse sources of non-point source pollution, which includes unregulated urban runoff, abandoned mine drainage, among many others. And addressing ag is a key part of the program. So 319 can support a variety of activities, which includes watershed planning, monitoring, education, training and outreach, but also technical assistance and demonstration of new conservation practices. USDA programs have had a really strong role in contributing to the success of 319 projects and help to restore waterways. So this last bullet just shows that USDA has been involved in about half of the 319 success stories, or these are water bodies that have been partially or fully restored due to non-point source efforts. So play a strong role in contributing to success in watershed projects. As mentioned, ag projects comprise a significant portion of the 319 project funding, and of the 319 funds that go to watershed projects, about 30 to 40% annually go towards addressing agricultural sources. So this map depicts investment of 319 related projects across the country at the HUC 4 scale. And as you can see on the map, for the most part, 319 funds awarded for agriculture and silviculture projects broadly do align with the farm and forest land use across the country. So I just outlined some of our ag partners at the national and state level, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about how these agricultural partners are helping to implement our national agricultural programs and initiatives. Some of you may be familiar already with the National Water Quality Initiative, or the NWQI, but for those that aren't, I'll spend a little bit of time talking you through this initiative. It's a joint initiative between the Department of Agriculture, NRCS, EPA, and state water quality agencies. It was launched in 2012, and really the overall objective of the initiative is to improve water quality through accelerated implementation of conservation practices. So the general framework is that NRCS provides funds through their EQIP program, their Environmental Quality Incentives Program, for water quality focused practices in priority watersheds across the country. So currently there are 197 NWQI watersheds across the country, but they vary each year with help from the state water quality agencies. And a real key part of this initiative is the state water quality collaboration in selection of these watersheds. So the watersheds are generally impaired, or they're contributing to an impairment for nutrients, sediment, and pathogens related to animal ag, and the state agencies have a key role in selecting and prioritizing these watersheds along with state NRCS offices. And another key role for the state water quality agencies is through in-stream water quality monitoring. So the state agencies are using 319 or other funds to monitor the impact of conservation practice implementation on in-stream water quality, and this is happening in about 67 watersheds across the country that have this focused in-stream water quality monitoring component. So while there's still challenges with the NWQI and we're learning about ways it can be improved, we are really excited about the progress to date. And a new program under the National Water Quality Initiative, which is highlighted on the last bullet on this slide, is the National Water Quality Initiative Readiness Pilot Project, where NRCS is essentially providing technical and financial assistance to either enhance existing watershed plans or conservation plans, or perhaps fill gaps that are needed to complete watershed plans and assessments and develop outreach plans. So this is happening approximately 1 year before conservation practice implementation goes into place in these watersheds, and it's really kind of the ideal model for putting conservation practices across the landscape. So this is right now in about 21 watersheds, and we're really excited about this direction and encouraged by the focus of watershed planning in NWQI, and hope it can be expanded beyond that as well. So aside from the NWQI, there are other multi-state large watershed efforts across the country that many of you are likely involved with or familiar with, including the Chesapeake Bay and the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain. But the Hypoxia Task Force is one kind of collaborative example I'm going to highlight in the next couple slides. And this is a federal-state partnership that works collaboratively to reduce nutrients, so nitrogen and phosphorus, to the Mississippi River and eventually reduce the size of the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So the partners are listed here on the slide. There's 12 basin states that contribute the highest nutrient loads to the Gulf. And currently the task force is really focused on implementing the state nutrient reduction strategies and tracking progress. So later in the webcast, we'll hear from Amy in Illinois about some work that they're doing to implement the nutrient reduction strategy. But overall, the coastal goal of the Hypoxia Task Force is by 2035 to reduce the 5-year running average size of the Gulf hypoxic zone to 5,000 kilometers squared. And the interim target is reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus by 20% loading by 2025. So it's a big challenging goal, but many partners are involved in working towards this goal, including the land-grant universities. So these 12 land-grant universities forms a group called the SARA 46. NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, provides support to stand up these multi-state committees like SARA 46. And this goal is to share expertise in science across the state boundaries in the Mississippi River Basin to better inform the state agencies, the strategies, and the stakeholders. So EPA is providing a grant to kind of support projects for priorities of collaboration, and those are listed. The 3 main themes are listed here in the center of the slide, but just a couple examples of this work includes focusing on advancing scientific understanding of conservation practices for nutrient reduction, so the effectiveness of those practices, also using social and civic engagement indicators to advance nutrient reduction efforts, and many more. But again, this is just one way that agricultural partnerships across the large swath of the country are coordinating efforts to reach these challenging nutrient reduction goals. Over the past few years, the Non-Point Source Program has had a great opportunity to partner with the agricultural community through a series of grants and cooperative agreements. And as I mentioned earlier, the CCAs and the ag retailers are a trusted source of information for farmers and landowners. So we've established a series of grants with these groups to connect these crop advisors and retailers with conservation districts to provide technical training on high-impact conservation practice systems and also on watershed planning efforts, and also to better understand the relationship between cover crops and soil health practices on water quality. So these are some of the grants that we have with the agricultural community currently, and as these efforts proceed, we'll be sure to share this information and outcomes with the states. While the focus of this webinar is on engagement between the non-point source community and the non-point source programs in agriculture, I do want to take a minute to highlight some of the work from our Office of Wastewater Management and their work with agriculture. It may be of relevance to some of you participating on the call. So OWM, the Office of Wastewater Management, are working through voluntary collaborations with the animal ag community to supplement their regulatory programs under the Clean Water Act. And to facilitate an open dialogue, EPA has established this animal ag discussion group, which is highlighted on the top left. It's really an informal group of stakeholders from the four major animal ag sectors: pork, poultry, beef, and dairy. And it convenes regularly to kind of keep all lines of communication open and develop a shared understanding of how we can enhance agricultural practices and maintain clean water. So I'm not going to spend time going through all of these efforts, but if you do have additional questions about these programs, you can contact my colleague, Joseph Ziobro, in the Office of Wastewater Management, and he can provide additional information. Okay, so this is the last part of my overview presentation, which is really focused on successful ways in which the state non-point source program have engaged with ag and specifically with NRCS. So to provide a little bit of background for the next two slides, back in 2014 and 2015, we worked with AQUA and the regional non-point source coordinators to develop kind of a set of best practices on enhancing EPA and state relationships with NRCS to advance water quality results. And this was developed, as mentioned, by feedback from the state and regional non-point source coordinators, but also USDA provided some input and reviewed the information that we developed. So the next two slides really outline the main takeaways from those dialogues. I'm going to talk through some of the examples, obviously not all, but by listing out some of these potential actions, I think some of you on the call might be able to find opportunities to work with your non-point source colleagues and engage with NRCS and other partners. This first slide focuses on potential actions for states for enhanced collaboration. So the first bullet is to be an active participant and stakeholder in the NRCS decision-making process. So we'll learn really great examples from the state and regional examples at the end of the presentation about how this has worked. But general recommendations include participating on state technical advisory committee meetings, participating more in the local subcommittee meetings. So these are the EQIP subcommittee meetings. But this is a really good place to exchange information and priorities on water quality and ag projects. And one example engagement piece that we've heard from the state is to work with NRCS as they develop and modify the score sheets for their annual EQIP funding to make water quality more of a priority. So, for example, if a water body is on the 303D list, the scoring rank increases. The second bullet is more about engaging NRCS in state water quality priorities and share appropriate information on state programs. So this includes, sharing priority watersheds, those local water quality issues, just relevant information on your programs with NRCS state offices. And one thing I just want to note is that NRCS may be most aware of the kind of regulatory nature of many of our state and federal programs, so it's really important to convey with NRCS partners that the focus here is working collaboratively through voluntary incentive-based programs. The third bullet is explore other opportunities to partner with NRCS. So a few of these examples include, perhaps bringing on an NRCS liaison to the state water quality or non-point source agency or even to a regional office. This is something that we'll hear about from Region 8 that's been successful in their region. And lastly, there are many other, obviously, opportunities like attending those field days or participating in conservation webinars, et cetera. But, where possible, attending these local events and showing up is really important to build the partnership. This next slide is focusing on EPA and regional and headquarter examples. So again, the first bullet is participate in NRCS meetings and include NRCS in regional meetings. Obviously, you know, there are challenges with this given the travel constraints and available fundings, but opportunities still may exist through remote meetings, et cetera. So, you know, inviting NRCS to regular calls with the states as appropriate is a really good way to share information about programs. Again, Region 8 will talk about this in more detail. Second is sharing information on EPA programs. So, for example, sharing information on the recovery potential tool or attains data, essentially looking for opportunities where EPA and states can assist with NRCS programs. And lastly, for the third bullet here, is to bring a group of partners together. So EPA can kind of be the convener to bring multiple stakeholders and partners together to discuss how to work on the ground to improve water quality. And the last bullet is highlighting productive partnerships. So one thing that we're doing at headquarters is tracking the USDA collaboration in our 319 success stories, but this can also happen at the regional level as well, is really flagging NRCS partnership efforts through water quality projects. So this is my last slide, but I've talked a lot about these best practices for engagement with NRCS and what we've learned from our regional coordinators and our state non-point source coordinators, but ultimately, as you all know, success looks very different across the country, and opportunities for engagement will vary. So hopefully through some of this you can glean from these recommendations and also from the following examples and find good new opportunities to engage that work in your state or regional office. But I do want to reiterate that there are a variety of ways in which the state and regional non-point source programs have engaged with ag and the ag community and already forged relationships with USDA and ag partners. So we recommend that the 303D TMDL contacts at both the state and regional level really reach out to their non-point source counterparts as a first step to understand those ongoing efforts, where there's been engagement, and then also understand how and where there may be good opportunities to engage. So this will really avoid starting engagement from scratch and ensuring more successful partnerships for improved water quality in the long term. So with that, as a soil scientist, I had to leave you with a picture of nice covered soil, our precious resource. But I'll take a few minutes for questions. I think we have about 10 minutes or so.
Erica, so far we haven't had any questions. So everyone, if you have a question for Erica, please send it to me through the chat or the Q&A box.
You can also feel free, my contact information is here. If you have questions or ideas, feel free to send me an email and we can talk about any of this.
All right, so we did get a question. Where have NRCS liaisons been established in state water quality agencies?
That's a really good question. So I know they have been established in, I believe, and the states that are on the call might be able to correct me in the chat box, but in Nebraska, Colorado, and Utah. And then the example that I referred to in Region 8 is where an NRCS liaison was working with the EPA regional office in North Dakota. So it was the state conservationist, agronomist in North Dakota working with the North Dakota non-point source coordinator, Eric Steinhaus, in Region 8. And this has been done using 319 funding in the past, and it has been kind of one opportunity that has been successful in sharing program information about the two agencies. And I'm sure there are other examples out there, so if those of you on the call have examples, feel free to type those in the chat box, and we can make sure everybody is aware of that.
Any other questions?
Well, if there are no more questions, Jasper, I know we have we have 4 presentations next, so maybe I'll suggest that we move forward, but if there are additional questions at the end, maybe we can take some time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can just open it up to more Q&A at the end of the state examples, region examples.
Okay, and like I said, my email is here if there's additional questions. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and welcome and introduce our next line of speakers. So we have Region 8 coming up next. The title of their presentation is Creating Partnerships Between EPA Region 8, NRCS, and States. So we have 2 presenters. We have Eric Steinhaus, the Non-Point Source Program Manager, EPA Region 8, and Judy Bloom, who's the Watershed Planning and Restoration Unit Manager in EPA Region 8. So thanks to Judy and Eric, and I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thanks, Erica.
Hey, Judy, is everything working all right?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for our presentation to pop up.
Oh, all right. 1 second.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
And I'm giving you, you're now going to be the presenter. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks, Erica, for having us here today. Happy to share some of our experiences in working with NRCS in the states and creating these partnerships. Today we're going to quickly cover why we work with NRCS and just give a quick little overview of that, talk about the history of developing these partnerships in our region, and also just talking about how we created some of the opportunities and then some of our examples of where we feel like the partnerships have really helped create some successes in the states and looking at water quality. So with that, why do we work with NRCS? Well, and most of you are aware of all the great things that NRCS does. NRCS has a strong relationships with ag producers. Let's see.
Page up and page down to scroll through the slides.
Yeah. Let's see, it's not moving for me. Let's see. There we go. All right, sorry about that. So NRCS has strong relationships with the ag producers, which EPA sometimes does not have. So we're able to work with NRCS and work with them and through them to reach out and interact with ag producers. NRCS also has some great, strong technical expertise in areas that EPA generally does not. NRCS is promoting soil health, which is important to us from EPA's perspective because soil health can reduce contaminants to the streams, helps to capture carbon, and it also reduces soil erosion, among many other benefits. NRCS and EPA Region 8, we share common goals. We want to both protect water and resources, and we want to ensure viable, sustainable agriculture. NRCS does have access to much more funding than we do at EPA Region 8, so that's another great benefit to be able to work with them on some of their funding priorities. And they're also just great people to work with. We found since we started on this new focus area for us that our NRCS partners are really great people. We learn a lot from them, and we really enjoy working with them. So what's the history of this? We, as a region, had lost our connections with NRCS, the state offices, and some of our states did have those connections, but some did not have as much of a connection with their state NRCS folks. So in 2013, we really began a concerted effort to reconnect, reinvigorate, and partner with NRCS, focusing on nutrients and water quality. And we started building off of the NWQI watershed partnerships that have been developed, and which was really starting to, in 2013, sort of really move forward with protecting and restoring these 303D listed water bodies through the 319 and TMDL program. One of the things we really did, and this is a shout out to our Utah partners, the Utah DEQ office, and Dave Brown, who recently retired as the Utah State Con. Really, when we reached out to them and to Dave Brown, really took us by the hand and helped us really understand their program, the NRCS program, and how NRCS operates. So that was really helpful. So once we made the decision that we were going to try to get to know our NRCS partners better, we really needed to create some opportunities. And the first thing we did is to set up a Region 8-wide conference with NRCS, EPA, and the states. And we really spent, it was a 3-day conference. We spent a day really focusing on NRCS and opportunities where we could learn from them and where we could partner. We also initiated conference calls with the states and NRCS, and we have them 2 to 3 times a year. And we also look for meetings and other opportunities in the region where we could connect in person, state technical meetings, NACD conferences, 319 task force meetings, any training that might be going on that NRCS is hosting that we could attend, really just any opportunity where we can meet people in person and start to establish those personal relationships. And our goal was to develop a water quality project in each of our states. We have 6 states that partners EPA, the state, and NRCS on a project. Because of the partnerships that we have and that we continue to develop with NRCS and the states, we have some examples that we'd like to share with you today of how having this partnership's really furthered the state's water quality efforts. And the first one is looking at the Lower Arkansas River Basin. It's in Colorado. It's in the southeastern portion of Colorado, and the river is impacted heavily by selenium. There are uranium issues, nutrients, and the whole area is driven by the water quantity compact with the state of Kansas, which is where the Lower Arkansas flows to. And in that compact, there's some mention of water quality. So there's a huge interest by the state to try to look at some of those water quality impacts to the stream, to the river. And at the time, the state was having a hard time engaging the ag sector, and they asked us, Region 8, if we could help them in their efforts. And what we did was to set up a stakeholder group, and I think this is kind of key to a lot of our efforts in working with the states and NRCS, is that, you know, we really don't have a regulatory hook. We don't have a lot of money that we can bring to an issue outside of the grant funding to the state, to the 319 program. But what we can do is we have people, and we have people who have time who can set up meetings, and they can take notes, and they can facilitate conversations. So that's what we look to do here. We set up a stakeholder group with the state and NRCS and the state ag department, and set up regularly occurring meetings. Every other month we would meet in person. Every other month we'd have a conference call. And as we met, more and more interested stakeholders and partners began to join the stakeholder group. And it's been going for about 1.5 years, and we've had some great results from that. The state has been able to identify some local partners to work with, and NRCS identified significant funding that they could use, EQIP funding that they could use in a targeted area to help move producers from flood irrigation to sprinklers, and also to put in cover crops. The stakeholder group is also facilitating a partnership, thank you, Eric, is facilitating a partnership with the ag producers and NRCS and the conservation districts to help fund some soil health projects with a few of the producers to help them move into more of a full soil health program on their fields, on their farm. And these will serve as pilot areas so that others can come and learn from them, learn what they're doing. And then finally, one of the big benefits of this stakeholder group and the partnership is that as the state is funding the development of a watershed plan for the 319 portion, they're also doing it jointly as an alternative plan, which for those of you on the call, just very briefly, an alternative plan is a way for the TMDL program to move more directly into implementation and to get faster water quality improvements. Still on the hook to do a TMDL if those water quality improvements don't play out. But it's a great way for the state, in this instance, to take the work of developing a watershed plan and save some time and effort and money and to do this jointly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Thanks, Judy. I'm going to talk about North Dakota first. Our relationship with the State Health Department was excellent when I started in the program and really led to the successes that I've been able to do in the non-point source program with them, particularly the water quality program. And in addition, they have always had a great working relationship with NRCS. So again, that was very easy for us to engage and start working with them directly and with the ag community. As Erica had mentioned, I shared a rotational assignment up in North Dakota with NRCS. This was a 4-month rotational assignment where I traded with the North Dakota State agronomist. And I made 4 separate trips up to North Dakota, each a 2-week period. And then the state agronomist from North Dakota came down here to our regional office and met with our folks, met the players, and helped us in our work here at EPA based on his great experience. And this really allowed a great sharing between the 2 agencies. I had done some work with the soil conservation districts, but it engaged me further with the producers, the extension offices up in North Dakota, and the other players that helped move this program along. And that relationship has continued, and I think has, helped blend both the 319 program as well as the NRCS EQIP program. We've been able to work with the State Health Department to incorporate cost share of 319 and EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program from NRCS. And then there was also some carryover money that was initially pitched to us here at EPA Region 8 from NRCS to help work in North Dakota with that, but it turned out to be a better working relationship through the State Health Department, which again, based on the relationship that we had with them, worked very well, and that has been put in place. Working with the soil conservation districts is a great opportunity for us, not something that, a lot of federal agencies would do down at the state level, but since we do a lot of our 319 funding through them and they're the experts on the ground, they very much welcomed us, and again, with the help of the State Health Department. And then based on these, broad-based agricultural partnerships, again, we've been able to blend both the 319 best management practices with the NRCS conservation practices, and also help to educate more on 303D impairments and TMDLs to improve water quality. And again, that's, the whole basis of what we're trying to do here. So that working relationship has really helped to educate and inform both at the state level and down at the local level. So on to South Dakota, we're currently looking to develop a joint EPA NRCS state nutrient reduction project. We've established monthly calls and continue to expand to include more partners in South Dakota, just like hopefully we've done in North Dakota. And the current plan is to identify a watershed with a significant resource, a watershed that we would consider to be a healthy watershed, one that we want to protect, and utilize NRCS training of agricultural specialists to work with producers and specifically implement nutrient management plans, which is a priority in South Dakota. So as far as lessons learned, we have three. First of all, it's our experience that it works best to lead by asking questions and expressing interest in the agricultural community and their programs, meet on site at their location, and identify areas where there's common ground and similar goals, and concentrate and build on the win-win relationship, the things that, each of the agencies are doing well and we can help build on for each other. Our EPA role we see is to offer and bring groups together and facilitate discussions. We like to do the background work so that the agricultural partners can easily and simply engage. And as been mentioned, we have minimal funding at EPA, so it helps to be able to leverage that, particularly with USDA and NRCS. And then the last lessons learned, our experience again is to be patient and be tireless. The process will take and can take sometimes several years to really take off. Again, I was fortunate in North Dakota, but in our other states, it's a continuous process, and be prepared for, the path not to be so direct necessarily, but you're going to be having successes and be sure and follow those along the way. So in closing, as far as how we view engaging with NRCS, our state health departments and DEQs and water quality programs and our other partners, we like to set up the meetings and invite the players and find that, a lot of times these things won't happen unless we actually take the initiative. We like to set the table, so to speak, and expect over time that the table will need to expand, and we hope that it will expand. We want it to expand. And then finally, sit back and enjoy the potluck. So I'm going to introduce our first state speaker. I think questions are at the end of all these presentations. Is that correct?
Yep, questions at the end.
Okay, questions at the end. So our next presenter from Wisconsin is Ann D. Hirakator. She's with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. She is the Runoff Management Grants Coordinator, and the title of her presentation is Engaging Agricultural Partners in Conservation Practice Adoption in the Wisconsin River Basin. So Ann, it's all yours.
Hi, this is Ann. Can somebody hear me? Confirm that I'm working?
Yep, we can hear you. And
okay, thank you.
You're the presenter now.
Okay, great. So thank you. My name is Ann Hirakator with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And my talk today is going to go in a little bit different direction than some of the previous discussion and case studies, in that I'll be focusing on partnerships with more non-agency individuals and organizations that influence decision-making of ag producers, such as was earlier mentioned, crop consultants and agronomists, agricultural organizations, ag producers themselves, as well as some local agencies such as county extension and county land conservation. So it's going to be a more locally on-the-ground focus. presentation. Until recently, for many years, I was the project manager for the Wisconsin River Phosphorus TMDL. And what I'm going to talk today about pertains to work I did while I was the TMDL project manager. So as you can see from the map in this slide, the Wisconsin River TMDL basin is extraordinarily large for a TMDL. It takes up over 15% of the state of Wisconsin and covers over 9,000 square miles. It is a very diverse area, both in terms of its physical environment. There's areas of flat, sandy soil, steep, eroding hills and ravines, and other flat areas with tight soils and high water table. And we have agriculture in all of these areas, and we have very diverse types of agriculture in the basin. We have the heart of America's dairy land. We have cranberry operations. We have some of the best potato and vegetable growing lands in this part of the state, as well as cash grain operation, and those are just the main ones. There are many others. So quite a challenge to figure out how are we going to work to address the agricultural pollutant load in the Wisconsin River Basin as part of implementing the Wisconsin River Phosphorus TMDL. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about why it is so important for us to engage agriculture in the implementation of the Wisconsin River TMDL. And that has to do with how TMDLs are implemented in Wisconsin. We have authority in Wisconsin to implement waste load allocations for industrial, municipal wastewater and urban stormwater directly through limits in permits. However, when it comes to the non-point side, as I'm sure it's similar in other areas, we have some authority to regulate agriculture, but there's no direct way to get from where we are now to what we need to achieve the load allocations in a TMDL. So for example, we have agricultural performance standards in Wisconsin. However, we can't enforce them at existing ag operations without an offer of 70% cost share if that operation was existing at the time the standards were promulgated. And even if they're a new operation and we do have the authority to enforce it without cost sharing, we often don't have the resources to enforce it. And while we do work with other agencies like NRCS and the State Department of Ag, again, those agencies, again, don't have a direct way to achieve TMDL load allocation. So, and then the next thing is that even if we did have the resources to fully cost share and enforce ag performance standards, in most parts of the Wisconsin River, in many parts of the Wisconsin River TMDL basins, it doesn't get us where we need to be to achieve our TMDL allocation. So this is just an example. It doesn't represent any particular area of the TMDL, but is illustrative of the fact that we need to even do better than our ag performance standards in order to achieve our TMDL water quality goals and load allocation. So we have to engage agriculture and try to figure out alternative ways outside of cost sharing and enforcement to achieve our TMDL goals. When I took this job back in 2012 as the TMDL project manager, there was a lot of finger pointing towards farmers, particularly coming from the regulated dischargers and from environmentalists. And the efforts to engage agriculture went something like, let's have a meeting and let's talk about the green water and how bad it is and how it's farmers' fault and what we think farmers should do about it. And they would invite farmers to come to these meetings, and not surprisingly, they never showed up. It was not an effective way to engage agriculture. So the reason why we didn't have ag participation with this approach, I think the answer is obvious if we think about attitudes. Most ag producers don't have favorable attitudes towards government in general, nor are they particularly motivated by environmental issues, particularly when those environmental issues aren't locally visible. And in this case, we're talking about a major river system, so a lot of these impacts aren't seen until you get further downstream in the watershed. So what do? Do we educate the farmers and try to change their attitudes and then hope that that leads to adoption of conservation behaviors? Normally when I give this presentation, I spend the first 20 or so minutes with some case studies illustrating the fact that many of our outreach efforts are based on the misguided assumption that, one, we can change attitudes with information, and two, that changing attitudes leads to change in behavior. And both of these are false. Attitudes are not based on information. They're primarily formed based on experience, but also other factors. And even if we could change attitudes with information, attitudes are only one small component of what influences behavior. So simply trying to educate and do outreach to producers is not going to necessarily get us to behavior change towards adoption of conservation practices. So how do we get to where we need to go? Let's think about attitudes. This is a quote from a environmental sociologist. If you imagine that your journey to get from where you are now to where you want to go, and where you want to go being more widespread adoption of agricultural conservation practices towards water quality, and imagine it's a raft trip and there's a lot of rocks in the rapids. You're not going to get from point A to point B by blowing up all the rocks along the way. If the rocks represent attitudes, what you need to do is navigate around those rocks, know where they are, and know how to navigate around them. Analogously with attitudes, we need to know what those attitudes are, and we need to work with them, not against them, when we're trying to reach the agricultural community. So one of the first things we did with this effort was to start building relationships with ag producers from different parts of the basin and different types of operations to try to understand their attitudes and specifically find where there were common interests between our goals for water quality and the goals of agricultural that we could use as a starting point for developing partnerships that might ultimately lead to more adoption of conservation practices. Again, we didn't do this through education or trying to change attitudes, but rather working with the attitudes that already existed. So I won't go through all the things that we found about the farmer attitudes, but a couple of the big ones. The most widely expressed and motivating attitude that we found was self-determination. Farmers don't want to be regulated. They want to show that they can do conservation without regulation, and we saw this manifested in different ways, ranging from ag producers who are stepping up to try to develop farmer self-certification programs for conservation as a way to market their products, to producers that just would simply straight out ask you, like, if I adopt these practices, will the government leave me alone and not regulate me? Farmers were very straight up that that's what they were motivated for. Most producers weren't particularly concerned with the green water directly. However, they did have some feeling of responsibility to the individuals who were affected by polluted water, in particular if they had a personal relationship with some of those. So we're trying to understand what attitudes might motivate producers, and I should add there that soil health was another important attitude that we found to be a motivator for producers. But next thing we wanted to do was look at, okay, how can we use those attitudes then to engage producers towards changing behavior? And for this, we looked to a study that was published in the 1950s about the acceptance and diffusion of hybrid corn into Iowa communities from 1920 to the mid-1940s. And what this study found, what you can see from this figure, is that even though adoption of this hybrid corn spanned a 20-year period, most of it happened within 5 years, between 1934 and 1939. So why is that? What they found was that while mass communication about this particular topic functioned as the initial source of information for most farmers, what actually influenced them to adopt this behavior was their interpersonal networks, other producers that they knew adopting it. So what we learned from this study, as well as from thousands of other studies on this topic of diffusion of innovations that have been done subsequent to 1950, is that there are different stages of behavior adoption, and there are different types of adopters. And if we understand that, sometimes we can help move this process along when we have particular behaviors that we want to promote because they can help with conservation. So this chart here represents different types of adopters. And you can see that we have individuals that are innovators and early adopters, and we know in the Wisconsin River Basin there are already folks that are adopting conservation practices. So we've got the innovators and early adopters already, and we've got those that are laggards that are never going to change no matter what you do unless you come out there with a really big stick. So let's look a little more closely at some of the characteristics of these folks. The innovators are the venturesome folks that have access to capital and seek out information from outside their local group. The early adopters are the respected opinion leaders in their community, and what they function there, they generally are seen as the embodiment of successful, discrete use of new ideas, and they function to decrease uncertainty in others about adopting something new by adopting it themselves and then demonstrating that it can be done successfully. The early majority are the deliberate folks who deliberate for some time before adopting a new practice, but look to the early adopters for advice and information. The late majority are the skeptics, and they generally wait to adopt something until they feel the increasing weight of peer pressure. And the laggards, of course, are the ones that are traditional and generally do what's been done in the past. So our strategy for the Wisconsin River Basin was to identify the innovators and early adopters within the different parts of the basin and within the different types of agricultural operations, help them make their behavior more visible to help us get from kind of this early adopter stage to the early majority stage where we get to that inflection point on the S-curve that we saw in the last slide. And if you see the orange arrow that just appeared, this is kind of a tipping point where you don't have to put in as much effort for behaviors to start being adopted in a more widespread basis. So, some highlights of our approach, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to kind of blow through these. We wanted to help make behaviors more visible, carefully identify who to start with by being strategic in identifying who those early adopters are, making sure they're well connected in their communities and have credibility with their peers, delivering the message through an individual or organization who has credibility with the audience you're trying to reach. And again, that gets to understanding attitudes and trust. And then we have some other here, focus on areas of common interest. We talked about understanding attitudes, and then commitments, positive actions, and two-sided messages are some other behavior change strategies I'm not going to go into because I'm running out of time. So with this strategy in mind, understanding attitudes and the relationships that we built, we were able to identify individuals from different parts of the basin and from different organizations representing the different types of agriculture operations that had the credibility and connection and trust to reach those innovators and early adopters and potentially early majority folks in the basin. And with this, we pulled some of those important folks together and formed a Healthy Soil, Healthy Water partnership. And one of the first efforts of this group was to have a workshop and to do this workshop to highlight some of those early adopters and innovators who are already doing things related to soil health. So we decided to focus on soil health and help highlight their behavior, make it more visible, give them a chance to connect with other producers that were trying these behaviors. And so we had a goal to, since we hadn't been able to engage ag producers in the past, we came up with a strategy to encourage them to participate. And that was, we didn't create a website or a flyer or anything like that, but we actually identified people that these ag producers knew personally to invite them to the workshop. So it was a very personal invitation. Again, that gets to finding a trusted messenger. So we were able to fill the room, and we had over half the room filled with ag producers, plus some agronomists, crop consultants, folks from NRCS, county land conservation staff, making up the rest of the folks. And I should add that our partners in this included the local Farm Bureau chapter, the Dairy Producers Association, the Potato and Vegetable Explorers Association, and organizations like that who had connections with those producers that were already doing some of these conservation practices. So these are some of the speakers that we had. Again, these are those early adopters and innovators. We highlighted their behavior, helped make it more visible, and gave other producers a chance to talk to them. We also, to a shout out to NRCS, we had Ray Archuleta there to promote soil health, and we were able to use some of the NRCS resources on soil health as a resource for this workshop as well. Our feedback from the workshop was very positive. We had 62% of the producers indicating that they intended to incorporate soil health, cover crop, and no-till into their operation in some way. And while we know that this response indicates only behavior or intention rather than actual behavior, through follow-up communications, we were able to confirm that many folks did follow through. For example, we had a large CAFO operator in the Little Old Plain watershed who's trying out no-till and cover crops on a portion of his farm and forming a partnership with some of the neighboring CAFO dairies to share information about cover crops and no-till. We have a director from a local agricultural college incorporating soil health into some of his curriculum and trying out some of the practices on the local learning farm, as well as we had adoption of cover and no-till by a number of farmers in the Mill Creek watershed. And I want to focus the rest of my presentation on the Mill Creek farmer watershed and the partnership that they formed with a local citizen lake advocacy group. So the Mill Creek farmers were a loosely and informally organized group of mostly medium-sized dairy producers and also cash grain producers. Collectively, this group harvested close to 9,000 acres of the Mill Creek watershed. And the Packers were a citizen advocacy group focusing on the impacts of phosphorus on the Castle Rock and Petenwell watershed here, where there's a lot of algae problems, and they call themselves regular people who love these lakes. So going into this, the lake group folks were told, you're never going to be able to work with the farmers, and you know they don't like you, don't even try to talk to them. And the farmers were told, those lake people are crazy, they hate you, they're going to point the finger at you. And so both groups were afraid to really engage and talk to the other. However, as a result of this workshop, this Healthy Soil, Healthy Water workshop and the partnership, some of the farmers from the Mill Creek watershed invited the Petenwell Castle Rock lake folks to go on a field tour of the farms with some of the farmers that were adopting no-till and covers as a result of having attended this workshop. So here's some photos of that, and here you can see some photos of the fields that they saw while they were on this tour, where they've got signs showing the part of the fields that are conventional crops and the part in no-till. Subsequent to that, the Petenwell Castle Rock Lake Group invited the Mill Creek farmers to a meeting to discuss the water quality issues, and as you can see from this photo, it was standing room only. They met in a local waterfront bar to talk about water quality issues. And then the lake folks took the farmers out on pontoons to see the impacts of phosphorus on the lake firsthand. And I think this photo here shows Rick Dorsher, who's the leader of the Petenwell Castle Rock Group, and John Aaron, who is the leader of the Mill Creek Farmers Group. And I think this relationship is really remarkable because through this relationship that's developed between the lake group and the farmers of Mill Creek group, now the farmers in that Mill Creek watershed do feel much more of a sense of responsibility for the impacts that their farming operation has on the downstream lake community. These two are in regular communication and have traveled together down to the state capitol in Madison to meet with legislators to advocate together on behalf of financial resources for clean water in the Wisconsin River Basin, including farmer-led councils. And while all this other stuff was going on, the farmers of Mill Creek were getting formally organized into a watershed council and applied for a grant from our state agriculture department to start monitoring their cover crops and no-till fields to see how it was impacting the environment. last December, subsequent, they had, the Mill Creek farmers had another field tour. They had farmers from all over the state of Wisconsin and from other neighboring states. They had 2 school bus loads filled with people came to see the work that these farmers were doing. And then just this past March, we had another Healthy Soil, Healthy Water workshop. We focused on overcoming barriers, particular to the Mill Creek watershed, which is high soils and high water table. They talked about from local producers who had experienced successfully doing that in that type of environment, as well as other barriers like lenders who are reluctant to loan money for equipment for conservation practices because they feel it's high risk, equipment vendors, things like that. We had lenders there, we had equipment vendors there to help talk about some of those issues and figure out how to overcome some of those barriers. And I'm rushing through all this, so I just want to end by saying that even though I'm no longer directly involved since I've changed position, I know that this partnership between the Mill Creek farmers and the Peat and Well Lake groups is going strong. They met just a few weeks ago in a local diner to start planning the activities for this upcoming season with regards to healthy soil and healthy water activities. And with that, I am done, and I apologize for going a few minutes over. Thank you. I guess now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Amy Walkenbach from the Illinois EPA, Bureau of Water, and her presentation is working with the ag commodity groups to implement Illinois' nutrient loss reduction strategy. I'll turn it over to Amy.
Thank you. Let's wait a second here for the presentation to come up. Okay, great. Okay, yes, I'm Amy Walkenbach with Illinois EPA, and I want to discuss briefly our interactions with the ag community as we implement our nutrient loss reduction strategy. This discussion isn't really limited to one project, but describes Illinois' program, which implements many, all aimed at the same goal of addressing nutrient losses for Illinois. And I'm trying to page down.
Try exiting and then entering full screen.
There we go. Thank you. Okay. Our strategy was released in July of 2015, so we are now embarking on 2 years. The ultimate goal of the nutrient reductions for the strategy is working towards a 45% reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus with an interim milestone of a 25% reduction for phosphorus loads and 15% reduction in nitrogen loads by 2025. You'll see I have a web link to the strategy document at the bottom of this slide for those interested in learning more about Illinois' nutrient loss reduction strategy. As indicated on the previous slide, several work groups were established to help implement the strategy. One of these work groups is the Ag Water Quality Partnership Forum. I will let you read the specific goals and accomplishments for this work group. But in general, this forum is made up of state and federal partners, commodity and industry groups, environmental advocates, and university staff. This group helps define policy for implementing the ag sector portion of the strategy. I will talk more about this group when I address the lessons learned. Since we are now approaching the 2-year milestone for having the strategy released, Illinois EPA, Illinois Department of Ag, our university partner, and the various work groups are busy developing our first biennial report. Much of what I will report today comes from the findings that will be in that report, which is due to be released this August. A survey of partners was made to define financial contributions to the implementation of the strategy. This slide shows the ag sector groups that responded to this request. State, federal, not-for-profit, and commodity industry groups are represented here. The financial contributions were divided into 4 categories. outreach, monitoring, research, and implementation, and then further subdivided into private versus funds. By and large, implementation is receiving the bulk of the funding, over $50 million. Noting that the time frame covered with this chart, though, is 2011 through 2015, with 2011 being the baseline for the strategy and 2015 the release of the strategy. Most all of the implementation funding is public funds, so think here Farm Bill and Clean Water Act 319 types of grant funds. In these next two slides, I want to show you many of the projects that have been undertaken to address nutrient loss in Illinois by our ag community. I apologize for the acronyms, but I wanted to be able to capture as much as I could on the slides, calling out a few of the notable projects. NLRS road shows. Over 1,100 attendees at evening meetings that were held throughout Illinois during the summer of 2015, so both prior to and just after the strategy was released. This was a collaborative effort by Illinois Farm Bureau, Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association, Illinois Council for Best Management Practices, Illinois Corn Growers Association, and Illinois Soybean Association, with presentations also given by Illinois Department of Agriculture and Illinois EPA. Next, I want to move on to the Certified Crop Advisor program. Erica mentioned this, and Illinois was one of the first states to embark on having a 4R specialty training and certification for CCAs with regard to the 4R management. So as of right now, we are looking at having the most CCAs with the specialty certification in the nation and hope to continue with that. The Illinois Nutrient Research and Education Council, this group feeds off of a $1 per ton fee from all fertilizer sold. That fee is collected by local retailers, and 75 cents of each dollar then goes to support this council, which in turn supports nutrient research and education activities to support Illinois farmers in their decision making. Much of the research that's being completed by state universities. The Nutrient Stewardship Grant Program, Illinois Farm Bureau developed a new grant program after the release of the strategy. Currently, they have an annual funding of this program at $100,000. It's directed at county farm bureaus and local soil and water conservation districts to implement activities to support the NLRS. And then finally, building connections with absentee farmland owners. This is an area that the Ag Forum found to be a gap in current programs. Prairie Rivers, a state environmental advocate group, which is often seen on opposing sides of agriculture, partnered with the American Farmland Trust Organization and with a local soil and water conservation district to send out newsletters to absentee landowners to start communicating with this often overlooked piece of the ag puzzle. Building new bridges and partnerships has been one of the greatest successes we've seen through the development and implementation of the strategy. No longer are we sitting in different rooms talking about the same issues. We are coming together and discussing how to reach our goals through partnerships. So, our lessons learned. You will see I took lessons from plural to a singular here. We learned one very important lesson. This lesson was learned rather early on in our implementation of the strategy, and that is to stay out of the way. Let programs develop. Let partners find a way to collaborate, but don't force programs or projects on groups. Let them find their way and what makes most sense to their membership. Early on, we used the Ag Water Quality Partnership Forum to discuss what types of programs or projects we as a forum should focus on. While the state agencies were providing a forum for this discussion, it generally turned into presentations to the group with no real desire by some at the table to embrace. Yet when we asked for member updates, it was abundantly clear that everyone at the table was doing something, and most were doing a lot of work developing projects to address nutrients. So the steering committee, which is a committee that was developed to guide all activities of the strategy, and that's made up of Illinois EPA, Illinois Department of Ag, and University of Illinois. This steering committee practiced a little adaptive management for how the forum could work successfully. Now, instead of bringing program ideas to the forum, we use the time to discuss what each of us is doing, where collaboration could happen. If a group's project has a gap, they can bring that to the forum and hopefully find new partners to answer their gaps. This approach has allowed each of the groups on the forum to follow the direction given by their membership and directors, and it allows each group to have ownership of the projects they are associated with. The competitiveness of the organizations show their membership they are working harder than other organizations has paid off to the environmental benefits. So, quickly, I want to show you some draft numbers that we have for the report that we're working on. For outreach, and these are conservative numbers because we can only track what we know and what is reported. But we're able to show 38,000 people have been touched by our ag outreach efforts to date. A NAV survey was completed to get a baseline on farmer knowledge. This will help guide the forum and organizations when deciding on which practices need more information to get into farmers' hands. Here we can see on this slide that bioreactors are the least understood by farmers, yet most farmers, over 50%, are either knowledgeable or very knowledgeable about the 4R strategy. And then also using this NAS survey with the baseline is what was going on in 2000 and comparing that to what farmers were doing at 2011 compared to what farmers are doing in 2015, you can see here there's a substantial increase in cover crops and a decrease in tiling. Now, I will admit these numbers represent a relatively small percentage of the acres farmed in Illinois, but the percent increase of cover crops is a giant step forward that we are very proud of. Identified in the nutrient loss reduction strategy were priority watersheds, both point source and non-point source, for both phosphorus and nitrogen. These areas are targeted for watershed planning, and the forum encourages organizations to target these areas for additional funding sources, or additional funding. Okay, so I'm finished up now with the nutrient loss reduction strategy, and I just want to touch on two other quick projects. Very recently here, US EPA approved a TMDL for the Waverly Lake watershed. This TMDL came to the agency as a 319 grant proposal to develop a watershed-based plan for Waverly Lake. This lake was on the 303D list for phosphorus. There are no point sources in the watershed. So after discussions with the applicant, this proposed plan became a TMDL with an associated implementation plan meeting all of US EPA's 9 minimum elements. Although the plan wasn't on our website as of yesterday, it is in the queue to be uploaded. So if anyone's interested, there is a link here on this slide that takes you to all of our TMDL reports, and Waverly Lake should be up by the end of this week. Just as an example of what this kind of blended TMDL watershed plan looks like, the first map is the primary nutrient and sediment sources that are found in the watershed. The second map identifies potential BMPs that would address those sources. This particular map identifies feeding areas, grade controls, grass waterways, wasp cobs, ponds, ripple structures, stream bank stabilization, wetland restoration, livestock fencing, and filter strip field border BMPs that could be used to address the critical areas identified in the first map. The report has many other similar maps for other BMPs and sources. We feel like this is the type of information that guides implementation activities and supports the public investments into the watershed. One last project, and Erica, thanks for the teaser during your presentation on the Indian Creek Watershed Project. This project highlights private-public partnerships and how targeting a small watershed can be successful. This watershed had been shown to provide high nitrate losses to a downstream public water supply that was listed for a nitrate impairment. Looking at 319 funds as well as NRCS funds, we were able to go into the watershed, blanket it with outreach and education in the watershed. We had local sponsors that were also bringing in private funds for demonstration projects, and we have been able to show that by getting conservation practices on over 50% of the ag land, that we now have a downward trend in nitrates that are leaving the watershed. So this has been a 6-year project. It's received national attention and is considered a model watershed project on how to work with landowners. So with that, I thank everyone for their attention and introduce to you Marcia Fox. Marcia is with the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, and her presentation is entitled Building Better Agricultural Programs and Partnerships in the First State. Marcia?
Thanks, Amy. Can anyone hear me? Hello?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Hi again. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. My name is Marcia Fox. I am the program manager here at Delaware's Non-Point Source program, and we are within Delaware's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. Although I've only been in my position for a short time, our program has been actively engaged with the ag community since 1996, including my predecessors. We work hard to build these partnerships and enhance the implementation of conservation practices using EPA funding. So our program is not only 319, but it also includes the Chesapeake Bay Implementation Program and Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So today I'm going to highlight some of our partnerships. But first, I wanted to give you a background on, oh, now I'm not working the page down.
Try closing full screen, putting it back up, and then page up and page down to advance.
Aha, okay. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the first state, Delaware, we're a very small state, only over 1 million acres of land. We're relatively flat, very coastal plain. We got a lot of beaches, not much topography, 400 feet at the highest point. But we have 3 counties, Newcastle being our northernmost county and Sussex being our southernmost, and Kent in the center. We have 4 major drainage basins, the Piedmont in the northern part of the county in Newcastle County, the Delaware Bay, which drains well, to the Delaware, but to our east, and the Chesapeake Bay to the west, which is about 1/3 of the state, and then our inland bays. We're a highly agricultural state. About 40% of our land mass is in ag, and we are the #1 producer for broilers in the nation, and lima beans when I checked. So to give you a background on some of the funding that we receive and how we spend our funding, our 319 funding, we spend about 20% in the urban realm with urban stream restoration and BMPs like rain gardens and bioinfiltration basins. The remaining funds was about 80%, and this is the funding that's spent after our programmatic and administrative costs. The 80% is spent in the ag sector, and that's, we concentrate that on wetland restoration practices, manure relocation, tree planting, which afforestation and riparian forest buffers, and then cover crops. And you'll see which one takes up the biggest piece of that pie there. So how do we decide to spend those funds that we receive? we meet regularly with our ag partners, and we network and exchange ideas, discuss this funding, make recommendations to enhance or develop these programs. This list that you see here is not comprehensive, but these are some of the groups and organizations we work with most. USDA, Farm Service Agency, NRCS, we attend the state technical committee meetings. We work with all of our soil and water conservation districts in each county, and within those conservation districts, they have locally led work groups that we also attend. In our Department of Agriculture, we are engaged in the Nutrient Management Commission. And then regionally, of course, we're part of the Chesapeake Bay Work Group and the Agricultural Work Group there, and the Delmarva Conservation Partnership Program, which works with 4R Alliance and the Wetland Reserve Program. And then and also even our University of Delaware and Delaware State University. We work with an array of partners here. But I wanted to highlight some of the projects that we've worked on recently in the state. And so the first one of those is the Cropland Transect Survey. So we had because we're part of the Chesapeake Bay Partnership, we had a meeting back in 2013, and it was apparent that we were falling short on many of our agricultural practices, specifically cover crops. And in 2013, I got a message that said, you know, there are winners and losers in this game. In Delaware, this time you're the loser. So we talked to EPA on what we could do to help us capture some of the practices that are on the ground. So we specifically targeted this survey using the CTIC survey through the Conservation Technology Innovation Center. So we're capturing practices on the ground that really aren't accounted for through our cost share programs like crop residue and cover crops, both traditional and commodity. EPA recommended that we use the CTI survey, and we basically had a meeting with all of our ag partners, and we sat them in a room and said, you know, let's try and do this. Do we feel that this survey is worth our time? We gathered partners through the Conservation District, the Department of Agriculture, University of Delaware, NRCS, and FSA, and we asked them, do you think this is worth our time? And do you think you could donate the staff and support for the survey? And we asked for a week of their time each year. So this map that you see on your screen here is part of that survey. Even though this looks like lines scribbled on a map, these are actually dots. So within each county, we drive a minimum of 110 miles making observations through a transect survey that's basically a window survey. And throughout the state, we have it's 1,974 stops that we make. So we found that traditionally with the cost share programs that we have for cover crops in the state, we can account for about 25% of the cover crops that are on the ground. But with the survey, we now see that we can capture about 25% more. So we're looking at almost 50% cover crops on the ground that we weren't capturing in traditional cost share programs. And thanks to this survey, we can actually report this data to the Bay program for credit, and we can also show this throughout the state with our other pollution control strategies and watershed implementation plans. So another one of our projects came out of NRCS's soil health discussions. So in 2014, they held a soil health forum. It was a national webcast, and unfortunately, we were having technical difficulties. We had a bunch of our ag partners meet and some farmers, and because of the difficulties, we weren't able to tune in. So for us, NRCS provided us a DVD to watch. And on that DVD, it highlighted some of the practices that the farmers were doing and some of the cover crop mixes they were using and tools and equipment. And one of the pieces of equipment that was highlighted in this video was an air seeder. So fortunately, we have a very active ag director in Sussex County in our Sussex Conservation District. And she really worked hard to move the soil health initiative farther in our state by developing a soil health committee. And then also, because they really saw this need for this air seeder, she lobbied her district board for about a year and pressed them to try and purchase this air seeder. So she was fortunate enough to get that at a price tag of $175,000. But the air seeder is a spray rig, a modified spray rig with a specialized seed box that allows for the early planting of cover crops within your standing cash crop. So we're getting cover crops in the ground earlier than any NRCS spec. So we can get them in. We started planting around July and getting these cover crops in, and it grows up with the actual cash crop and doesn't harm the crop. So when we had that soil health, you know, farmers in the room said that they needed to go out of the state to get this information. So we were wondering and brainstorming on what we could do to try and bring that to our state instead of them going to Pennsylvania or Maryland for information. So we started working together and holding workshops and programs and then developing this air seeder program. So at about the same time that the district got the air seeder, Delaware applied for the first round of RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program through NRCS, and we were awarded. We applied with Maryland and Virginia and concentrated in the CCA, the critical conservation area of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And each of our states decided to focus on the practices that meant the most to us. And for Delaware, that was cover crops. So, and just to give you a background on how cover crops work in our state, we have a very, we have competitive cost share programs. And with NRCS EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, our farmers can get a maximum of $76 an acre for cover crops. However, this program doesn't account for any bad weather, so a farmer could be in violation of contract if he can't plant due to excessively wet falls or field conditions, and the crop must be planted at a certain date. However, on the opposite side of things, our soil and water conservation districts offer $50 per acre for cover crops. And basically, a farmer comes into the conservation district office in the summer, and he enrolls all of his acres and all of his farmland in the program. And then he comes back and he certifies what was planted. In the spring, after destruction or was killed by herbicide, the conservation district planters then go out and verify whether or not the crop was actually planted and killed. So there's a significant difference per acre between the EQIP and the district cost share incentive rates. However, most of our farmers, because of the rigidness of the NRCS program, they come through the district program. So when RCPP came out, we thought, well, how is there a way that we can entice this program and entice our farmers to come in and enroll in it? So that's when we worked with our district and NRCS to develop this application. So what we did was we cost shared, the 319, our NPS program, decided to cost share at $25 an acre for rye seed mix because it is the most efficient of all the cover crops that are available according to the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership. So we offered the rye seed incentive in addition to the EQIP incentive, and we offered the planting of the air seeder, and that's what you'll see in this picture here. So again, it's a modified spray rig. It plants cover crops within a standing cash crop. This program has been extremely successful. In the first year, we rolled it out in 2015, and just in this program alone, we were able to plant 4,020 acres. In the second year, we were able to plant 6,324 acres, and that's with the rye seed too. And this is a 57% increase in cover crop implementation just because of this air seeder program. And I know some of the concerns from the farmers is that the district would then plant using this. So the farmer wouldn't be able to drive this. The district actually drives this on the field. And there was concern about destruction of the row crops. We've found that there's less than 1% destruction, and that's usually on the turn rows and when entering and exiting the field. So actually, but due to the success of this partnership, we were able to implement programs like the Cropland Survey, the RCPP, the Air Seeder Program, and our local soil health initiatives So overall, just in Sussex County, which is our largest ag county, we had an increase of implementation from 2015 to 2016, overall of 13%. In one of our watersheds in the inland bays, we actually planted 42.6% more cover crop this year than last. So it was extremely successful, and we attributed that to the partnership that we have with all of our ag friends. So the take-home message for everyone here today is just become familiar with your USDA and Soil and Water Conservation District programs. Show up to the meetings. I know this has been echoed a lot today, and build those relationships. And understand that farmers talk. Many farmers are doing the right thing, and we found this, and we've proven this through our Cropland Transect survey. And it's not for water quality, but for their own benefit, for the economics, for the yield and crop. Take advantage of those partnerships with conservation districts and other nonprofits like nature societies or nature conservancies. Farmers spread information, good or bad, they spread it word of mouth. So if your program tanks, and they're gonna know it all across the county. But fortunately, they love their conservation district staff. They do not love us, the folks that wear environmental badges, so I would recommend that no one goes out and wears their environmental gear when entering a farm. We have 5 soil health champions featured here in this picture in Sussex County. And soil health champions are recognized by the National Association of Conservation Districts. There are about 150 of those champions nationwide, and we're proud to say that 5 of our Sussex County farmers are recognized for their efforts. And because they are actively promoting soil health, they attend all of our workshops, they talk to the media, and they advocate all of our soil health practices while adopting them. So that's all I have for you guys today, and at this point, I think we can take some questions. Jasper?
Yeah, thanks, Marcia, and thanks, everyone. We have had a few questions come in, so all panelists, if you want to answer, just unmute your phone and jump in. First question was, so external ag commodity and advocacy groups such as the Farmers Union and the American Farm Bureau have strong influence with the local farmer. How is EPA at a national level engaged with these influential groups?
Thanks, Jasper. This is Erica. I believe this one's for me. So, yeah, I appreciate the comment. It's a good one. So for a number of years, we have been engaged, or EPA, engages with the ag organizations through the Administrator's Agriculture Counselor and through the Regional Ag Advisor. So we support and are advised by the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Community Federal Advisory Committee. So that's the FRRCC FACA. Some of you may be familiar with that advisory committee, but many members of the FACA are involved at the national scale in the ag community. So that's a really important opportunity. But also the headquarters programmatic offices engage with these organizations. So, for example, the Office of Water, where we sit, hosts these regularly scheduled ag stakeholder coffees at EPA headquarters, and these are open to interested parties. So that's kind of one way that there is this level of engagement. I appreciate the comment, and if you have other ideas or suggestions, feel free to reach out to me.
All right. Of the NWQI watersheds NRCS selected, how many are state non-point source priority watersheds?
Okay, this is Erica again. I think that one's for me. So that's another good question. One thing that's really key to the National Water Quality Initiative is that, as I mentioned, state water quality agencies are involved in recommending and selecting the priority watersheds. So, we don't have an analysis of state priority watersheds and NWQI watersheds, but we do know that in each state, the state water quality was on board and recommended those either, changes to NWQI watersheds or the initial selection of watersheds, and that's something that we work with the state water quality agencies through the EPA regions every year when the watershed selections come out for NWQI, and ensure that the state water quality agency is on board and has been participating in those discussions with the NRCS state offices about selection of priority watersheds. And we're happy that that has been, in every case, the state has been involved over the past couple of years.
Hi, Jasper. It's Marcia. I wanted to also chime in on that. For us in the Chesapeake Bay, it is a priority watershed. And we've been so successful with the RCPP that we've implemented in the Chesapeake Bay watershed that we are doing that for the NWQI funding. So our farmers are able to get the $25 seed call share, too, for the rye seed and the air cedar planting.
Thanks, Marcia.
Thanks. We've had a few other questions come in. What is the 4R program?
This is Erica. I'll take it, but I'll just say for the state and regional examples, feel free to chime in and provide your input on any of these questions, too. So the 4R program stands for the right rate, source, timing, and placement of nutrients. So it's a nutrient management strategy that's kind of being implemented by the Fertilizer Institute and their sustainability program, but also more generally it's a concept about the correct application of nutrient management across in farm fields. So it's, like I said earlier, it's not just for fertilizer but also for manure application as well, and it's something that has become an important part of the Certified Crop Advisor specialty program for nutrient management, among others.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to jump in on that? And if not, we have a question for Ann. Can you talk briefly about what the two-sided message is?
Hi, this is Ann. Yeah, sure. Two-sided messages. Basically, what that gets at is when you are developing a message, you need to know your audience, and if you're talking to a relatively uneducated audience or audience that's not knowledgeable about the topic, it's most effective to use a one-sided message where you simply make the message very simple and to the point, whereas when you're talking to audiences that are more knowledgeable about a topic, or in a particular, they might feel that they're more knowledgeable than who's ever talking. It's important that you not use a one-sided message, but that you use two-sided messages. Otherwise, meaning that you talk about both sides of an issue, the pros and the cons and the goods and the bads, because if you don't do that, they won't take you seriously and they won't trust you.
All right, thanks. These presentations will be made available for download along with the recording of today's webinar. That should be up in a week or two on New EPIC's website, and I'll send a link to everyone who registered. Do we have any more questions? If you have some, just send them into the chat. You'll also have a chance to write in any questions during the post-webinar today. No, if not, Eric, you want to say a few words to wrap?
I think most people, I think and Marcia in Delaware for sharing their stories. So, again, there's a variety of state non-point source programs have worked with the ag community. There's a lot to learn from these groups that we heard from earlier, but also the other partners across the country. So, these relationships look very different, and we're happy to learn about some of those today. We encourage those, on the phone to reach out to their non-point source coordinators to learn about those opportunities and where there could be opportunities to collaborate further. So thanks to everyone for participating on the call, and thanks, Jasper.
Thanks, everyone. We do have one more question for Amy at the last minute. Any sense of the money invested, both public and private, in conservation practices and systems in the Indian Creek watershed?
Yeah, I can give you at least a kind of overview. For 319 money for the 6-year project, we spent, includes the 40% match required by the local partner. We about $1.2 million. That was primarily for outreach efforts, developing vignettes, doing 1 or 2 tours each of the 6 years. That include a national tour. It includes fact sheets. It includes staff time for getting out and talking to farmers, having meetings, stakeholder meetings, multiple meetings every month. So that was kind of our input. We also did some demonstration projects with that money, as well as monitoring analysis with that. Now, as far as the MRBI NRCS funds that went into the watershed, the numbers I have off the top of my head I don't think are really correct, and so I'm going to have to get back to you and make sure we've got them. But it looks like for 3 years of implementation that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 to $200,000 annually. So, but again, I need to reach out and make sure what those numbers are.
Okay, and we can follow up with you afterwards on that.
Okay, great.
All right. So that's all we have for today. Thank you again to all of our panelists and speakers. Thank you to everyone who attended. Again, this webinar will be up on our website shortly. Keep an eye out for future webinars in this series. We're going to have another in June, and then wrap out this year in September. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and have a good afternoon.